Deadly clashes on the Venezuelan border this weekend as forces loyal to disputed President Maduro largely stood by him, blocking most opposition efforts to bring humanitarian aid into the country. And it's time now for our Sunday group. GOP strategist Karl Rove, columnist for The Hill, Juan Williams, Julie Pace, Washington bureau chief for the Associated Press, and Josh Holmes, Senator Mitch McConnell's former chief of staff. Well, Karl, where are we at the end of a tumultuous Saturday? Is Maduro's hold on power stronger or weaker?
I'd say weaker. And every day, the steady application of the force of the Lima Group in the United States will make him weaker. Because inside the country, hundreds of thousands of people are taking to the streets or protesting at the border crossing points. And there was Maduro as his military forces killed protesters dancing on a stage in front of a captive crowd in Caracas. So, no, I think he is weaker today, and every day that the United States and its allies. What's interesting to me is this was led by the Lima Group. This was led by the Organization of American States. The president receives a phone call before he takes action from Justin Trudeau. This is multilateral action involving the United States, and the steady application of force and the protests inside the country will bring Maduro down.
But one, the sad fact is, for people who would like to see Maduro out, that there had been a lot of talk that perhaps the military, the armed forces would turn on Maduro, would side with the people, would side with the opposition. That didn't happen. So what does the U.S. do now? And how does President Trump and his administration and the U.S. avoid the image that once again, here's the U.S. intervening in Latin America, which has happened dozens of times over the last century?
And not to good result. We don't have a great track record of successful intervention. So many unintended consequences, so much resentments against the U.S. You know, to me, Maduro is a vulgar dictator. I think people are suffering. I think that's why the humanitarian aid, why the Lima Group sees a necessity to get involved. But I thought you were on target in raising the question with Secretary Pompeo about U.S. military intervention. We can have CIA and other people go in there and try to undermine him, but at some point, I think the American people say, why is it our job? Intervention in this area, as I said, does not have a good track record, and it also broaches the possibility that the U.S. would actually put military forces in to oust Maduro. This doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense with the public in terms of our foreign policy. It doesn't make sense. And of course, it fits with the current push against all the charges of socialism that the Trump administration is advancing here against their Democratic opponents.
We'll be talking about that with Tom Perez in the next segment. Let's talk about the other big foreign policy story this week, as we just discussed with the Secretary of State, and that is that President Trump will be meeting with Kim Jong-un in Vietnam starting Wednesday for a second summit. Here's what the president had to say about that this week.
We started off with a very good meeting, and I think we'll continue that along. I don't think this will be the last meeting by any chance, but I do think that the relationship is very strong.
Julie, how confident are U.S. officials that they're going to come out of this summit with something more than they came out of Singapore with, which were basically vague declarations of an intent to denuclearize?
You hear two different things from U.S. officials. One, privately, they say that their expectations of some kind of significant deal are pretty low in this summit. There might be more talk about denuclearization, but the idea that they would come out with something signed specific with dates and verification is probably pretty low. But the other thing you do hear is that there is some concern that the president, because he knows that the takeaway from the first summit was that it was vague, that there wasn't anything particularly specific, that he could get in a room with Kim and make some type of concession that goes against what his advisors want him to do, that he could be so eager to strike some kind of deal that he could give something up. I think that is a real concern, particularly if you look at, and I know we'll talk about this a bit later, some of what will be happening in Washington while he is abroad. Michael Cohen, his former lawyer, who's going to be testifying, that he could be looking to direct attention in a different direction.
Josh, what's your sense among Republicans, particularly Senate Republicans, particularly Senate foreign policy experts, How do they feel about this summit and about giving Kim another big international platform, which always tends to weaken the sanctions regime? There are indications that Russia and China have loosened up in Singapore, and not getting a big concession from the North Koreans on specifics of denuclearization.
Well, I think the important thing to focus on is to look at this as a continuum. From when the president was first inaugurated, I don't think there was any question that we were perhaps even at the brink of war with North Korea. They were launching missiles indiscriminately, some of which they were testing could hit the continental United States. Clearly, we could not ignore that. And so you basically have two paths at that point. You could approach the brink of war, or you could do what President Trump has been doing, which is engaging directly with Kim. And I think, you know, no question, there has not been the concrete signed agreements out of the first Singapore summit, and probably won't be out of this. But, you know, what's not happening is they're not sending missiles. They're not testing missiles. They're not sort of broaching that brink of war type fever that we were at for the first year of his presidency. And I think that in and of itself is great progress.
Karl, you're the one person at this table who's had some experience with this when you were advising President Bush 43. When he would head into a high-stakes summit, how much did he and his team, all of you, know about what you already had baked in the cake, what you were going to get at the end of the summit?
A lot. And that's one of the problems with our relationship with North Korea. We don't even have a common definition of what constitutes denuclearization. We don't have an agreement upon the process. What comes first, denuclearization or sanctions relief? And so they really are, they've had one summit, but let's not kid ourselves. We're at the beginning of a process. We're not deep into the process. And we're going to face an issue here where what kind of concrete steps are the North Koreans going to take? Yeah, sure, they're not sending missiles over Japan, and they're not testing nuclear weapons, but maybe they don't need to test. We know they've got operative nuclear weapons, and we know they've got the ability to send missiles. Now, whether they can marry the two together, we don't know. But what concrete steps are we going to take? And one of the key things that I think people are looking at when I talk to people in the foreign policy area is the facility Yongbyon, which is the only facility from which they derive fissile material, three elements that they need for nuclear weapons. And the question is, the test of seriousness is whether or not they will decommission Yongbyon and make it under an international inspection regime. Yeah.
But I have to tell you, I talked to a foreign policy expert this week who said, and I asked him specifically that issue, and he said they've got enough fissile material already. Oh, they don't need Yongbyon. They've already got enough.
Look, they've got dozens of weapons. Let's not kid ourselves. Even if we came to an agreement tomorrow that they're not going to make any more, they have plenty of material, plenty of weapons. They will continue to use the material they have on hand to fabricate weapons unless there's an agreement to stop. And even then, in a country that is a virtual slave state, how the heck do we have an inspection regime that works?
You know, that's a very pessimistic view, but I must say that it raises the question in my mind, Karl, why are we giving this man a platform, an international platform? Why are we legitimizing him? And don't forget that the Chinese and the Russians have often operated in such a way as to support this regime.
Well, you ask a question, I'll give you an answer.
Real quick.
The administration, I think, has made the determination that it is better to engage than to not engage. Now, we can argue about that, but we engaged and it didn't work. We didn't engage and that didn't work. The president has so far gotten some things out of this, at least the hiatus on testing.
Okay. All right. In any case, let's wait and see what happens Wednesday and Thursday in Vietnam.